The miracles this month is has a history of miracles. We should see even greater miracles now. I'm not saying Mizmer David. Chanukah Adonai Yom Tzara Yisayev B'Shem Adonai Yaakov. Yishlach Evich HaMikodesh U'Mitzion Yisadeka. Yisrael Kol Ma'asecha V'Rivascha Yidashna Sema. Yitin V'Chalka V'Nevecha V'Chol Atzos V'Yimalu. V'Rana V'Shuvasecha V'Shem Eloheinu Nidu. V'Bale Adonai Kol Ma'Shalisecha. Ata Yedaiti Ki Yishia Adonai Meshichei Yanehu Mishmei Kodsho B'Gvuros Yesha Yeminim Eile B'Rechev V'Eile B'Susim V'Nachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Naskir Hema Koru V'Fogu V'Nachnu Kamenu V'Naseidah Adonai Yeshia HaMelech Yaneinu V'Yem Kareinu. My iPhone just performed a miracle. It naturally checked off attendance for everybody that's here.
Wow.
Okay.
Is he also going to teach a class?
Nadia, how did you manage to avoid the radar? It didn't check you off. Okay.
That was me.
Something's wrong. In fact, some names are missing from the thing. So I don't know. Something happened. Fine. Okay. So again, we're going to take a little detour. In the next few days, we're going to learn and prepare for Chanukah, to understand Chanukah al pi Chassidus. What is Chanukah from a Chassidic perspective? It's almost a different Chanukah when you learn about it from a Chassidic perspective. So here we have these booklets that we're going to be using. We have enough there, I think we do. If anybody wants a booklet where they could write in and keep it, we have some of those here too. This is here. Otherwise, you can use these booklets. So I want to give an introduction and then we'll go into the subject itself. So the first introduction is the same introduction we give for every yontif to explain al pi Chassidus. Like, what is the key difference between yontif al pi Chassidus or the way we understand the yontif without Chassidus? When I say without Chassidus, I mean not without knowledge of Torah, but without knowledge of Chassidus. It means you learn Gemara and you learn Halacha and you learn Shulchan Aruch and you learn all the Midrashim. You know everything that it says, but still there's a key difference between the way we view a yontif when you study Chassidus and when you don't. There are many differences, but the key difference is that without Chassidus, we're basically celebrating something that happened in the past. And it happened, a lot of them, most of Yom Tov happened thousands of years in the past. Matan Torah with Shavuos was over 3,300 years ago. Pesach was over 3,300 years ago. Sukkot was over 3,300 years ago. Purim was 2,300 years ago. And Chanukah was 2,000 and a little bit less than that, 2,000 years ago. According to Chassidus, we're not celebrating something that happened in the past, celebrating something which is happening now. What does that mean? I mean, we can benefit from it now. What does it mean it's happening now? So this is based on the famous words of the Arizal, and that is words that come from Megillas Esther, Yomim, Ho'elu, Nishkorim, V'nasim, that these days of Purim are remembered, commemorated, and if they're commemorated, and V'nasim, and they're done. So we know that the simple meaning is What does it mean? They're remembered and they're done. The Gemara says there's a part of Purim which has to be remembered verbally, and there's a part of Purim which has to be observed practically through an action. That's what it means by V'nasim. So the verbal part is reading the Megillah. The practical part is sending Shalach Manas, eating the Suda, and so on. And the Arizal says that in addition to that, the deeper meaning of the words are that if we remember the Yontif properly, if we commemorate the Yontif according to Hashem's commandments, by learning and following the halachas, V'nasim, it's done, meaning this Yontif, what happens thousands of years ago, reoccurs. It happens every single year, and we're able to benefit from it. Even though it doesn't reoccur, Chanukah happened only once, but it means, and again, I'm saying this briefly because we spoke about this at length in the beginning of the year, that whenever there's a miracle that happens down here, this is only the sort of end result. What's really going on is that there's a miracle that's happening up there in Shemayim. Everything that happens down here comes from Shemayim. But specifically, when we see something happening which is miraculous, something outstanding, something unusual, unprecedented, it means that something miraculous, unusual, unprecedented is happening up there. And as a result, it's happening down here. Now, even though this is pure Chassidus, but like everything else, if you look hard enough, you can find it in the revealed part of Torah. And guess what? You can find it in Rashi and Chumash. Where exactly the Rashi and Chumash is, I will see if I can look it up and tell you. It's in Chumash Devarim, where the Eibusha says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you see that I gave you I have you conquering the enemy. So Rashi says, what do you mean you see? Nothing happened yet. This is about the future. So Rashi says, Hashem took the angel that's in charge of that country, put that angel under Moshe Rabbeinu's foot, and told Moshe Rabbeinu to step on it. And when he stepped on him, he defeated him up there. Once he defeated him up there, we know that it'll be defeated down here. Which means whatever happens down here is a result of what goes on up there. So every year Chanukah, every year Purim, Pesach, Shavuos, every Yontif, there's some amazing, unprecedented Gili Alakus in the heavenly realm. And as a result of that, there was the miracle. But every year there's no miracle like the first time. Nevertheless, there is Gili Alakus, and our avodah is to absorb that. So now, in our generation, we'll talk about our generation soon, but in every generation, when we say that Chanukah reoccurs, it's mainly that we're able to absorb a much greater measure of godly light because of Chanukah. This part is clear. Now we find another thing, that in the time of Mitzrayim, the way they defeated Mitzrayim was the Eibishter made 10 makas, one plague after another, and according to what it says in the Haggadah, comes from the Gemara, it wasn't really 10, but according to the opinion in Gemara, there was, each makkah consisted of 5, so it was 50 makkahs, or one opinion says it was 40 makkahs, but that was one. When Amalek attacked the Yidden, something else happened. There were no makkahs. Moshe Rabbeinu went up on the mountain, held up his hand high, and the Yidden fought the war, and as long as his hands were up, they would win the war. Then when the Yidden went into Eretz Yisrael, they had to conquer Yericho. What did they do? There was no makkahs, and there was no hands. There was a different method. Yeshua circled the city 7 times, blew shofar, and the walls caved in. That's how they got in. Purim, Mordechai gathered 22,000 children together. What is the difference? Because each yontif wasn't just a yontif about overcoming an enemy, but this enemy embodies a certain klipa. And therefore, each klipa has to be defeated and conquered a different way, spiritually. And that's why there was a different thing to do, Begashmis, because Baruchnias, it was a different war. This was a war against Midian. This is a war against Amalek. This is a war against Mitzrayim. This is a war against Paras, Nebuchadnezzar, each nation that we fought was really a different klipa. And that's what Chassidus focuses on. What is the klipa in the time of Purim? What is the klipa in the time of Mitzrayim? What is the klipa in the time of Chanukah that had to be defeated? Which explains all the things that we do on Chanukah, because it's not just about fighting a war and overcoming an enemy, but there's a klipa there. How do we overcome this klipa?
Does it mean that this klipa comes every year before, or it's just like yearly custom to commemorate it, or we have that?
Well, generally speaking, I would understand this is a klipa that continues to exist, and every year when Chanukah comes around, we give an additional koyach to defeat that klipa on a personal level. Oh, I did make a note of it. It's in Dvarim, chapter 2, Pasuk Lamed Aleph. That's where we have that Rashi that I mentioned before. So, like we do with every Yontif, in this booklet, you have a list. A list, and this list is a list of all these things we're going to be discussing. Everything on this list is all about Hasidic phrases or quotes related to Chanukah. If you know everything already on here, then what we're going to do is just be a review. If you don't, then we'll be learning something new. So let's start. I'll try to go through this whole list. Because like every Yontif, if we would learn a mimer on Chanukah, it's going to cover one detail, one point. Or the same as with the Sikha. What I'm trying to do is to give you at least general knowledge of all the different subjects that are talked about in Chassidus when it comes to Chanukah, at least in some general way. So this is a collage of all the different subjects that are touched on in Chassidus. So some of this is from my Maimorim, some of this from the Sichos. Let's start. I'm not going to go in order, but we're going to go into explaining certain things. First of all, we come to the first question, is that the Yevonim, Chanukah is about Yevonim, the Greeks, and we had to defeat them. They were our enemy at the time, but we find something very different than other times. When the Nebuchadnezzar, when the Babylonians defeated the Yidden, they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. When the Romans defeated the Yidden, they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. When the Yevonim started to rule the Yidden and defeat them, they didn't destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Why not? It should have been the same thing. They're now in control. You know the Beis Hamikdash is our source of strength. Why didn't they destroy the Beis Hamikdash? What did they do? So if you look in on number 7, this is a quote from Gemara. The Gemara, when it describes what's Chanukah, it describes that the Yevonim came, and these are the words, Timu kol hashmanim shebeheichel. They caused all the oil in the Beis Hamikdash to become impure. Because when a non-Jew touches oil, it becomes impure, and it's disqualified from being used for the Beis Hamikdash, for the menorah. So in a sense, the damage they did to the Beis Hamikdash was more about impurity. They brought idols in there. They did everything. They took treif animals like a pig, and they brought it on the Mizbeach to bring a carbon. In other words, what they did was to bring impurity into the Beis Hamikdash, but it didn't destroy the Beis Hamikdash. How come? Question number 1. Another question is, the Gemara discusses, and by the way, we have the Gemara here, so when we do it, we'll go back to the Gemara later and point things out. But the Gemara discusses this. There's no Gemara called Chanukah, by the way. It's interesting. There's a Gemara on Purim. There's a Gemara on Pesach, a separate tractate. For Pesach, a separate one for Rosh Hashanah, a separate one for Yom Kippur, a separate one for Sukkot. There isn't a separate tractate for Shavuos, and there isn't a separate tractate for Chanukah. But where do we find Chanukah? We find Chanukah, in other words, where is there a place in Gemara we can say this is the primary place to find what the Gemara has to say about Chanukah is in the tractate of Shabbos. Could you see any connection between Chanukah and Shabbos? This is a tough one. Right? That is the connection. These are the two places we have a mitzvah to light candles, Shabbos candles and Chanukah candles. In fact, later we'll talk a lot about the differences between the two. So in Masechta Shabbos, here you have a few pages, and then we'll probably have some time to go into it, especially this week, unless, and I don't know if Rabbi Greenberg did this. Did he study the Gemara? I can't know. So maybe we'll do the Gemara also. So the Gemara says, my Chanukah, maybe we should look inside right now just to see what I'm referring to. Take a look at page, on the bottom you have page numbers, page 6. So it says, my Chanukah. You see the words? Page 6. The two columns, the first column. It is the second paragraph, starts with my Chanukah. What does that mean? Rashi says, we'll do the English. What is the reason? They're not asking what is Chanukah. What is the reason for the rabbinic yontiv of Chanukah? On what account, which miracle did the rabbis establish this yontiv? The Tana Rabbanan. So this is what we learned in the Brisa. B'chafei b'Kislev, on the 25th day of Kislev, Yom Chanukah T'manya Inun. There are 8 days of Chanukah that we celebrate. And what does it mean celebrate? You're allowed to do malacha, you can buy and sell, you can carry, but the loy misbet behin, you're not allowed to be eulogized during these days, which means it's days of joy. You're not allowed to fast in those days. It doesn't say you have to eat a meal like other Yom Tovim, but you're not allowed to do these things which are the opposite of simcha. And why did they declare this as a yontiv? When they went into Yevon and the Heichel, when the Greeks went into the Heichel, into the Beis HaMikdash, here's that term, they contaminated all the oils that were in the sanctuary. When the Chashmonaim overpowered them, and they were the ones, who defeated them, and they got the Beis HaMikdash back, Botku, they were searching for pure olive oil. They couldn't find Ella, only one thing, Pach Echad Shel Shemen, a small flask of oil. It was laying, as the Gemara says, it was under one of the floorboards or under the ground. It sort of rolled away and was hidden, so they didn't see it. And the Eibishter made that as a miracle, it should be hidden there. But the problem was, there wasn't enough oil only to last for 1 day. And in order to get the pure olive oil from the best olives and bring it to Beis HaMikdash, it was a matter of going back and forth that it had to be in 8 days. But here was only enough oil for 1 day. Nasa B'nez, there was a miracle. And this oil lasted for 8 days. The next year, so next year, Chanukah, after this happened, they established it as a yontif. And how do we celebrate this yontif? By reciting Hallel and giving thanksgiving to Hashem. So question number 1 is, what we see clearly from here is that the yontif was established to celebrate which miracle? With the oil. But wait a second, there was another miracle. The other miracle was that there was a war, and the Yidden won the war. Isn't that a miracle? Not only that, let's turn to another page, which is page 7. One of the things which you do on Chanukah, we don't say Yalav Yavai, but we do say Ala Nisim. That's a prayer that we put in. Let's just read what it says there. B'mei Matas Yov ben Yechon Keren Gadol, Chashmei Yevonov. In those days, Kishamdo Malchus Yavon HaRasha, when the wicked kingdom of Yavon, they rose to power, and they rose Alam Chisrael against the Yidden. Lashkicham Teresecha, they wanted us to forget the Torah. Navirim Mechukrit Sanecha, they wanted us to stop observing the mitzvahs. But you, B'rachamecha Rabim, Amalatol and Beit Sarasim, you stood by them in their time of distress. Rafta Esrivam, you fought their fight. Dantas dinam, you judged their judgment. Nakamtas nikmosam, you took revenge. And what did you do? Masata giborim biat chaloshim, you took the mighty and they were defeated by the weak. Rabim biyam ma'atim, there were many that were defeated by few. Tmeim biyat tahirim, the impure were defeated by the pure. Rishayim biyat tzadikim, the wicked were defeated by the tzadikim. The zaydim biyat eski serasecha. I know in English they say wantum something or other, but zaydim means there were Jews who were assimilated Jews. They became Hellenists, and they were defeated by those Jews who were engaged in Torah and followed Torah. So what do you see from this? That this was a miracle. In fact, Rashi in Chumash says, how many people were fighting with the Maccabees? They were like the partisans in the times of the war, right? How many people were there? Rashi says there were 12 people. So 12 people defeated a huge, organized, established army of the Greeks. It's a miracle of Ma'alim Aler Chateva. I always thought when I grew up, the Maccabees were leading the war, but everybody joined them. Rashi and Chumash says it was just 12 people fighting, without all the resources that the other side had. So isn't that enough of a reason to make a yontif? And not only that, which yontif is bigger? The fact that there was a miracle with the oil, but not only big, I would say, which one was more crucial? Well, that they won the war. If they wouldn't have won the war, there couldn't have been the Chanukah menorah because they didn't have no access to the base of English. So that miracle is, in a sense, greater, and it precedes the other miracle. First, you win the war. Now you have access to base of English. And there's a second miracle. So this miracle is what counts the most, that they won the war. And yet, it doesn't say that they established the yontif based on this miracle of winning the war. Another question is, Hashem made a miracle that they found a small jug of oil. That's number 8. I'm pointing this down so we know that we're discussing this. We're going to explain this from Chassidus. Le'motzu, they didn't find elapach echad shel shemen, one little jug of oil. Shaya munach, it was laying there hidden, but it had chesamesh shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. How did they know that it was not touched and it was pure? Because it still had a seal on it. And had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. A jug of oil doesn't need the seal of the Kohen Gadol to say that it's pure. Any seal of any Kohen means that it was not opened. Here Hashem made a nest, it has the seal of the Kohen Gadol. Why dafka the Kohen Gadol? Why couldn't it be? Obviously this was with intentional. Why couldn't it be any seal? And there's another question, and that is that this menorah, which relied on Chanukah, is to commemorate the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. Yet in so many ways, it's different than the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. Number one, the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash was lit every single day the same amount. Chanukah is every day more than the day before. In fact, not only Chanukah, but I think is the only mitzvah that we know that the number and the measurement is not the same from day to day. With Pesach, there's no mitzvah like the first day eat 3 matzahs, the second day 4 matzahs, the 5th day 5 matzahs. By the end of Pesach, you turn into a matzah. In Lulav Nesser, we have 4 species, and it doesn't say that every day you eat another one. Or even these 4, it's not one day you do 1, the next day 2. There's a certain measurement, a certain amount, and that's steady. And over here, every day 1 is more. But especially if it's to commemorate the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Beis Hamikdash, everything was the same every day. Why here is every day 1 more than the day before? Another question is, when was the time to light the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash? The Beis Hamikdash wasn't lit during the day. It was burning during the night, but the time to light it was by day, right? Before nightfall, dafka before nightfall. When is the time to light the Chanukah menorah? Punkt baker, dafka when it's night. Third question is, or maybe fourth, I'm not counting, is the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash was lit not only in the Beis Hamikdash, but we know there were many compartments in the Beis Hamikdash, and each part had more kedusha than the other part. So, for example, when you approach the steps of the Beis Hamikdash, then you go into the first part called Ezras Nashim, then you go into the second part where the Karbanos were. The most inner chamber of the Beis Hamikdash was the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And the place where the menorah was right next to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which means second to the highest level of Kedusha. In fact, the Gemara says that in all of Yerushalayim, in all of the world, there are 10 levels of Kedusha. Eretz Yisrael has more Kedusha than all other countries. Yerushalayim has more Kedusha than all other cities. The Har Habayis, the mountain, has more Kedusha than any other part of Yerushalayim. It goes on and on and on, 10 levels. And the place where the menorah stood was level number 9, which means the menorah was situated in the most inner chamber of the Beis HaMikdash. Chanukah menorah, the mitzvah is in the most outer chamber, so to speak. In fact, we don't light Chanukah menorah the way it was lit originally. The way it's supposed to be lit, al pei halacha, originally is outside. Outside means literally outside by the door. And not only outside by the door, if a person has a courtyard, and the courtyard has a gate, it has to be by the gate, the furthest part to the house, to the street. That's what the menorah is supposed to be. In Eretz Yisrael, today a lot of people light it outside. What do they do about the wind? So they put it into some sort of a case to prevent it from being extinguished. But it's the opposite of the menorah Beis Hamikdash. Here it's by day, and here it's by night. Here it's supposed to be in the most inner chamber, and here it's in the outside. Another thing about Chanukah menorah is that most mitzvahs are supposed to be connected to the right side, right and left. Not that there's anything wrong with the left, but we see the mitzvahs are connected to the right. The right is considered, I guess, Chassidus, Chesed and Gvura. Chanukah menorah is specifically on the left side. Here you have another quote from Gemara number 4, that when the Gemara talks about where is the place to situate, where should be the location of the menorah, mezuzah miyamin, it's supposed to be by the doorpost. The mezuzah is on the right side, and the Chanukah menorah is on the left side. Why is the dafka on the left side? And by the way, the idea that it's on the outside is also very unusual. How many mitzvahs do you know that the place to do the mitzvahs is in the street? A mitzvah is either in your home, or it's in a shul, or in a yeshiva, or in a Beis HaMikdash, inside. And we can understand how a mitzvah belongs inside. We don't have anything that the mitzvah is outside. The only thing we do know that's outside is the paraduma. It says the red heifer, after they slaughtered it, where did they burn the ashes? That was outside of the Beis Hamikdash, on a mountain. I mean, we also say we do Kiddush Levana outside, but that's understood. We're making a bracha on the moon. You have to be outside. But otherwise, the place for mitzvahs are inside. Here it's dafka outside. So everything that I just said, I'll tell you which numbers we just touched on. Number 13. These are the words also. Neiros Chanukah, mitzvah la'anicha pesach beisim b'chutz. Why do we light it inside? The halacha teacher, I'm sure, will explain that. Number 12. The time to light it is meshetishka chama, once the sun goes down. The opposite of Beis Hamikdash, which is when it's still light. Number 8 is the one that they found only one jug of oil, and it had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. Number 7 is where they made all the oil impure. And number 4 is the fact that it's dafka on the left side. Number 3 is that every night you're supposed to add another light. That's another discussion we'll go into, is the two opinions, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says you're supposed to light the first night 1, the second night 2, and the third night 3. And Beis Shammai says we do the opposite. We'll learn the Gemara, but I just want to point out this, just because it's an interesting acronym. If you look at the top of the page, number 1. You see number 1? every letter is the first letter of a word, and the word is Chanukah. Ches, Neiros, 8 candles, the halacha, and the halacha is Beis Hillel, like Beis Hillel. So that's the word Chanukah. Basically meaning that like 8 candles, but not like Beis Shammai that says 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but like Beis Hillel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is another thing that has to be understood. How could there be an opinion to count down? Kedusha is always going up, not going down. So a lot of questions. So first we'll start off with understanding what was the klipa of the Yavanim. So to answer this question, we're going to go back to the prayer of Al Nisim, which was written by Anshe Knesset Agdayla. So every word is holy, every letter is precise. And they chose specifically these words. Let's look again at that page. I underlined the words that we're going to speak about. And that is page 7. Two things we underline. What do they want? Lashkicham terasecha. We should forget your Torah. Ulahaviram michuker itzanecha. And to make us abandon your mitzvahs. So there's two questions there. One question, why does it say terasecha, your Torah? It should have said to forget the Torah. Why do we have to emphasize terasecha? And the second thing is, why does it say chukim? It wasn't only chukim. We know that the mitzvahs are divided into 3 categories. There's mishpatim, there's chukim, and there's edus. And the difference is mishpatim are mitzvahs which are logical. And even if the Torah wasn't given to us, we would know to do those mitzvahs. Edus are mitzvahs that are not something which we'd have known on our own, like not to steal or not to kill, those things which are moral and ethical, honoring parents. But mitzvahs that the Torah wasn't given, we wouldn't have known. But once the Torah was given, it makes sense. So edus means testimony. Like Shabbos is testimony that Hashem created the world and rested on the 7th day. Pesach is testimony that we went out of Mitzrayim. The third category is mitzvahs that we can't understand. We don't see the logic there. Like mitzvahs of milchik and fleshik, the mitzvah of purity and impurity, that a mikveh could make a person pure, and these things make a person impure. We don't understand those halachas, and many other things. So why does it emphasize chuker itzenecha? So the answer is as follows. And this is, again, what's unique about the klipa of Amalek. Again, we're talking about a klipa, and the people that were fighting were people like all other people, like Hamas. These were just gangsters, animals. They were just killing people. But in them was embodied a spiritual force. In fact, that was what was motivating them to do what they did. And that spiritual force is klipa. But each klipa is a different klipa. What's this klipa? The klipa of the Yevanim, of the Greeks in those days, was, we know that they were into culture, and they were into, that's what the Hellenists were all about, to build the body, and basically be philosophical. The Greek philosophers, that's something which is well known. In a sense, the avodah zarah of the Greeks was intellect. And their main thing was not so much that Yidden shouldn't study Torah at all. They didn't mind. Why? Because they're into studying and using your brain and being intellectual. But what they were against was the idea of the way we learn Torah, like it's something holy and it's something godly, and that's what they were against. Just like you study science, you study math, you study philosophy, you study any other field of wisdom, you study Torah. That's fine. But the idea of studying Torah because it's godly and it's something which is connected to Hashem, and in the way you're surrendering your understanding to what Hashem says, that is something they were against. There's nothing higher than Seichel. By them, the highest thing that existed was intellect and logic, and you can't accept anything that's outside of that realm. And therefore, what they emphasized in the Chachamim said they wanted us to forget Torah Secha, that it's your Torah. So we don't need to explain this. This is, in Chassidus talks about this at length. It's one of the first things that the Alter Rebbe talks about in Tanya, that the wisdom, the logic, the intellect in Torah is only a capsule, if we can use the example, which means the capsule is just a container. What's really the force and the power that's healing a person is the medicine inside the capsule. So too, Torah and the intellect in Torah, the logic, the wisdom is external. The main thing of Torah is that it's godly, that it's Hashem's wisdom, and Hashem invested himself in the words of Torah. And when I understand something, and I really absorb it intellectually in a very deep way, this is the way I'm able to absorb and internalize in the deepest way Hashem's presence through the words of Torah. And that's the mile of Torah. And that's what they were against. And therefore, this reflected in the way they did the Beis HaMikdash. They didn't destroy the Beis HaMikdash. They weren't out to destroy our learning Torah or even our observance of mitzvahs. So you have your way of life, you have your path. But the idea that they were saying this is all godly and it's not sort of necessarily based on logic, that's what they were against. So what did they do? They made the oil tameh. When you make oil tameh, you'll notice nothing changes, at least to the physical eye. The oil is the same oil as before. But now it's impure. It's a world of a difference from a Torah perspective. Before it was pure, now it's impure. In fact, there's an interesting halacha. If you damage someone else's possession, you have to pay, right? What if you damage a possession by taking, let's say, wine, which is expensive wine, costs $100, a case of wine, and you give it to someone who's not Jewish, and by him handling the wine, now it's not kosher. Do you pay for it or not? So the Gemara says this is called hezek she'eino niker. It means damage that you can't recognize. And damage you can't recognize, you're exempt from paying. Yeah.
Is it because there's no way of telling for sure, there's no way of verifying that it actually was damaged?
No, that couldn't be the reason, because even if there'd be two witnesses watching, going into this deeply, it gives us an understanding of why the Torah considers me liable to pay. Why shouldn't I pay? If the point is that I made this person lose money, what's the difference? How I made him lose money? So you have to understand, you have to try to understand what's the logic of why we pay money, and therefore in this case where it's not visible, you don't pay. Which I don't know the answer to that question, but I know there is an answer. But that means that when you make something tameh, you really don't see any difference. It's internal, it's something which is deeper. And that's what they did to Yiddishkeit. They didn't want to necessarily sort of dismantle the structure of Yiddishkeit. They wanted to take away the holiness from the Yiddishkeit and the godliness from the Yiddishkeit and just do it like a cultural way of life, a different culture. Okay, it's not our culture, it's your culture, but it should be cultural. It should be a way of living and extract that godly element that's in it. And that was what the war was all about, to make the fine oil that's holy and to recognize, no, that Torah is godly and mitzvahs are godly, and that's the main reason for observing mitzvahs. And of course, it's difficult because really Torah is brilliant. There's really tremendous wisdom in Torah. And really learning Torah gives tremendous pleasure just of the wisdom. But if it's not being studied for the right reasons, then this is not the Torah that we know. This is not your Torah. In fact, there are stories of people who were brilliant Torah scholars and they abandoned Yiddishkeit, unfortunately, because of various reasons. And they still continued to study Torah because they loved learning. It was something which they enjoyed. But that's not what Torah is. And that's what the war was all about. And once we get to understand this, we'll understand the answer to a lot of the questions, which we'll have to go into tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem, to be continued. If you see anybody that belongs to this class, please give them regards and remind them that we miss them here. Okay. You're very welcome.